Welcome everyone to this celebration of life for my father, Bud Ketchba. My name is Laura, for those of you who don't know me, and on behalf of my mother, Burl, and my brothers, Paul and Andrew, I would like to thank you all for coming today to help us remember and honor the amazing man that I call Dad. There are people here who have been friends with my father for almost 60 years. Old neighbors from Markland Woods, past colleagues from his teaching days. There are people here who have known my father because they were friends with me. And of course, there are his most recent friends, his friends from Parkland, people who helped make his last years ones full of camaraderie, laughter, and love. And I am so very grateful for all of you and for all the wonderful friendships you shared with my dad throughout his life. My dad was born and raised in a small town called Eden, which is about 60 kilometers from London, Ontario. At the time, Eden was tobacco farming country, and as a young boy, my father worked on the tobacco farm. Being surrounded by so much tobacco might have been the reason he tried his first cigarette at the age of 12. He climbed up a tree to smoke it and promptly fell to the ground, knocking himself unconscious and breaking his wrist. Yep, my dad was a bit of a rascal in his youth. He ran with an older crowd, and he would occasionally get in trouble. However, despite these minor delinquencies, he was always good with his studies. In fact, he was put ahead a couple of grades by his teachers, and he was always the youngest in his class. Dad learned to play the violin at an early age. His mother used to drive him into London every Saturday for his lessons, and he practiced on a favorite violin that was given to him by his grandfather. He could also play the piano by ear despite not taking any lessons. His sister Donna was the piano player in the family, and they would often play duets together. And so music became a large part of my dad's life from a very early age. After finishing his primary education, Dad got his first job teaching in a town called Straffordville. He had only turned 18, and I believe there were students older than he was in his class. During this time, he continued his studies part-time at Western University. In fact, he was the first member of his family to receive a post-secondary education. At Western, he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree, which in turn enabled him to get another teaching post in Niagara Falls, where, as fate would have it, he met my mom. Lost my place. Sorry. Now, my story might have ended here because apparently my mom turned Dad down not once, but twice when he asked her out. Maybe she was washing her hair, but Dad was persistent, or maybe he just wore her down, I don't know. In any case, the third time was the charm, and soon Bud and Burl became a couple. Things progressed as they usually do, and Mom and Dad were married in Burlington on June 30th, 1956. They settled in Niagara Falls and had their first child, me, in 1959, and then my brother Paul in 1961, and after that they moved to Etobicoke and had their third child, Andrew, in 1963. During these early years, my dad spent his summers studying at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, where he would eventually earn his master's in music. And from there, he went on to teach at Franklin Corner Public School, and then at Beverly Heights Middle School, where he would become head of the music department. By all accounts, my dad was a beloved teacher. He was firm, yet always fair. He would often joke that the secret to controlling a class was to never smile until after the Christmas break. In 1971, Mom and Dad bought a cottage in Muskoka. Mom spent her summers in Muskoka as a child, and in turn, she introduced Dad to the joys of cottage life. I think Mom lost a few nights' sleep over that purchase, wondering if she and Dad could afford a second property. Well, 50 years later, the cottage is still a refuge for every member of our family. Dad loved spending time there. The advantage of having both parents in the teaching profession was that our family was able to spend the entire summer, every summer, at the cottage. Thanksgiving dinners at the cottage, surrounded by the trees in all their splendor, was magical, even if occasionally the power went out while the turkey was in the oven. The last time Dad was at the cottage was last Thanksgiving. We were chatting together and he suddenly looked at me and said, "Is there anywhere else on earth you'd rather be?" And at that moment, there was nowhere else. Dad retired in 1987, the year my first child, Jennifer, was born. I remember him phoning me on what would have been his first day back at school and telling me that he didn't know what to do with himself and could he take Jennifer and I out to lunch. Well, this was to be the first of many weekly lunches I would have with my dad. Dad loved going out for lunch or dinner. He loved good food and fine dining. It didn't matter where we were, in town or out of town, no matter where we might find ourselves, Dad always knew a good restaurant. Knowing what to do with himself in retirement didn't last long. Dad taught himself cross-stitch and needlepoint, and he created beautiful pillows and pictures that grace all of our homes. He also loved to wallpaper and paint, and would happily decorate the house when it needed it. He volunteered for Travelers Aid, Meals on Wheels with my mom, the orthopedic clinic at Humber Hospital, and at some point, Dad applied for and got a teaching job at a Jewish boys' school. He was the only non-Jewish member of the faculty, and he stayed at this job for 5 years until my mom retired in 1991. Throughout his life, music was front and center. There were always records playing on our stereo at home, everything from classical to big band to jazz. The music you are listening to today was lovingly compiled by my daughter Michelle and includes many of my dad's favorite musical artists. Dad was a subscriber to the Toronto Symphony, the Blumenfeld Theatre, and Soul Pepper, and made generous contributions to each. He loved going to live theatre at Stratford and Niagara-on-the-Lake. He sang in a number of choirs, and he was often asked to play his violin at weddings and other important events. Dad enjoyed traveling and liked new experiences. He tried hand gliding, and he rode in a hot air balloon. He mentioned once that he would like to try skydiving, but that he did not get to do, much to the relief of my mom. Dad exuded a quiet intelligence and had an understated sense of humor. He rarely raised his voice and was especially patient and non-judgmental. I had a lot of freedom as a child and a teenager, and I think that is why I never wanted to disappoint him. I knew a good thing when I had it. Dad would probably wonder what all the fuss was about today. He didn't like being the center of attention, and he never wanted any big parties thrown in his honor. And God forbid you ever threw him a surprise party. Well, surprise, Dad. Today, it's all about you. We're all here to honor the wonderful man, husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather you were. I think it was Dr. Seuss who wrote, "To the world you may be one person, but to one person you may be the world." And my dad was definitely the world to me. Last year I wrote a poem for my dad to commemorate his 90th birthday and everything he has meant to me over the years. My mom asked if I would share that poem with you today. It's been slightly modified from its original version because unfortunately we are not celebrating his birthday today, but we are celebrating Charles Elwyn Bud Ketchabah, my dad, and the very first love of my life. My poem is called A Daughter's First Love. I need a drink of water. A daughter's first love is her father, they say. Well, for me, that's true in many a way. For what does a girl want her first love to be? Is it someone heroic and handsome as can be? Is it someone to laugh with, to play with, or cry with? Is it someone to forgive those little white lies with? Is it a superhero without the tights? Is it someone to tuck you in at night? Is it someone to chase your fears away? Is it someone who stands by you, come what may? It's all of this and more wrapped up in one man. And speaking as your number one fan, I'd like to share a memory or two that always make me think of you. Recollections from days gone by, snapshots, if you will, from my mind's eye, of how you, Dad, fulfilled my list of first love requirements, hand over fist. Someone heroic my dad was, hands down, for whenever there was a spider around, he'd ride in like one of the Magnificent Seven and send that arachnid to spider heaven. And what man could not be a hero when he falls asleep while babysitting his progeny, then wakes to find they've decorated the wall with poop from their diapers, a la Andy Warhol. Or pins a diaper to his baby girl's skin, or fails to catch her and she falls on her chin. Well, I'll tell you why that man's a hero, my friend. He has to face his wife in the end. A hero he was, facing risk without fear, like teaching me to drive in my 16th year. A far cry from the days when I sat on his lap, holding the wheel, thinking I was all that. But now I was working the pedals and steering. Was that a gasp from my dad I was hearing? As I tore up the dust on old Bruce Lake Drive, barely missing the lake. Thank God we survived. And speaking of lakes and cars and such, getting ready for the drive up north was too much. To watch Dad pack up the trunk was a hoot. I'll never get all this crap in the boot. It feels like we're going away for a year. We'll never get this damn car out of first gear. And then, as if that wasn't enough, and it always happened when the driving got rough, our cat would crawl under the left front seat and barf up his food at the base of Dad's feet. And not only did Dad have to put up with that, but we'd bug him to tell us at the drop of a hat how many bridges there were left to go under. Come on, Dad, tell us the number. How many bridges till we can get out of the car? Patience? My dad had patience by far. My dad was someone to laugh with and play with, someone with whom I could even get away with a joke or two at his expense. And if lucky, I'd even make a few cents. Like the time he told us kids he would buy any pit in the cherries he'd prepared for a pie. Well, I found the first one and I got paid a whole nickel. And then more were discovered, putting Dad in a pickle. He was so sure his cherries had no pits inside, but he lost a bundle that night as well as his pride. I have many more memories that revolve around food. Dairy Queen after dinner when Dad was in the mood. Blueberry pancakes he'd flip at the lake. Donuts made piano lessons easier to take. More donuts and pizza while watching the moon. Lunches with Jennifer, born in June. Thanksgiving and Christmas with all of us there. Memories like this are beyond compare. My dad would play pool with me now and again when I was around ages 9 or 10. I loved to play pool and I enjoy it still, especially when Dad would sweeten the deal with a double or nothing allowance number. Did he let me win? I'll always wonder. A dad is someone who carries you upstairs in the middle of the night without any care. When you've fallen asleep on those long car rides home, was there ever a more comforting feeling? No. In a father's arms, you're safe as houses when you're watching that movie about the Wizard of Oz. That horrid Miss Gulch in her ugly hat couldn't touch me while I was safe on Dad's lap. The monkeys could screech and the wicked witch fly, and those trees could throw apples at passers-by. My dad kept me safe through all of those scenes. Now that's a true hero, if you know what I mean. But when I got older, I had a few crushes, a few broken hearts, a few love's first blushes. But my dad never let things progress very far. When my date would bring me home in his car, a respectable time would pass and no more. Then my dad would take up his post by the door and turn the outside lights off and on, which meant get inside and tell your friend to be gone. Even now that I'm married with a love of my own, a family, a home, and a fancy iPhone, my first love will still and always be the one who first took care of me. My father, my dad, my hero, it's true. My fun, my comfort, my teacher too. There are so many things I learned from you. I have always been your number one fan as my dad and even more as a man. And although you have loved me since the day of my birth, when I first appeared here on planet Earth, I have loved you my whole life through, and I will forever continue to do. And even though you are gone and we are apart, I'll remember you always with a smile in my heart.